that was my solution to everything, was substances.
Yeah.
My problem wasn't the drinking and the drugging. It was life. I couldn't handle life on life's terms.
Yeah.
That's something we hear about a lot in recovery, life on life's terms.
Right.
But to your question though, ask for help, and I think I talked about this on another podcast that I was the host, but a lot of people talk about this is a struggle and a fight, but it's not. It's give up. That's the thing. Surrendering to win is it's not that it's overlooked or not talked about, but somehow people still are always talking about fighting. That's the whole problem. So when we keep fighting, in my form of recovery, we cease fighting everything and everyone, even alcohol.
This is the Turn Your Life Around podcast, and I'm the 180 lady. I've been helping people turn their lives around since 2007 as the founder and CEO of a large mental health company. The purpose of this podcast is to have meaningful conversations with old friends and new friends, everyday people just like you and me, about how they turn their lives around. We'll discuss all things mental health, fitness, finances, relationships, parenting, spirituality, you name it. My hope is that you can take something away that will encourage you today. I'm your host, Sarah Coates. Are you ready to turn your life around? Hi, welcome to the podcast. Welcome back. If you've been a listener, if this is your first time, thanks so much for joining. Today, I'm really excited to have a guest with us. His name is B.Reeves. He's the Director of Business Development for New Waters Recovery, which is a detox and diagnostic center in the Raleigh area. And we're just so glad to have you. Hi, B.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
You all have been doing a podcast for a little bit, so this is like old school for you.
A little bit. I was actually here in this very room on Friday morning, and it's now Monday morning. So
yeah.
Yeah, when Donna sent me the address, she already knew where it was because I just been here. So
You're a professional podcaster. How long has New Waters been doing their podcast?
we just over a year.
That's
actually.
so awesome.
Yep.
And what is the focus of the podcast you all do?
So in general, the idea is we want to help anybody with a loved one in any phase of recovery, whether that's active addiction, long-term recovery, pre-contemplative, but just to be a resource for the community and for families.
Yeah.
And so we started out, it was pretty focused on just professionals in the industry, but now we've sort of branched out to people who have some connection or either in recovery and work in other field, but not strictly just industry professionals.
That's good.
Mm-hmm.
That is sort of similar. So segue to this podcast, the Turn Your Life Around podcast. When I started it a couple years ago, it was named something different and it was focused on interviewing the therapist in my company. And then I kind of refreshed and rebranded it, restarted it again to the Turn Your Life Around podcast, where we are talking with people in the community who have turning life around stories. And so, thanks for taking a few minutes today to share your turning life around story. Will you share a little bit with the audience about where you're from and how your life got started?
Sure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
It's my pleasure to be here. And I've been watching yours and I love it
Thanks.
too. And y'all have a beautiful studio. Just some particulars. I was born in Raleigh. I'm almost 47. I was born in, some people like to make the distinction, in the old Rex Hospital, which was on St. Mary Street and Wade Avenue.
Yeah.
I was born in Raleigh, and I feel like if I'm telling my story at a meeting, I try to give some just a few details that I think shaped my life. Had literally, everything I ever needed and pretty much everything I ever wanted. I would have what most people would consider a privileged upbringing.
Right.
Parents got divorced when I was 8. Not that it was some super messy Kramer versus Kramer type thing, but I do cite that as when I look back, I started playing one off the other, manipulating to get my way, manipulating to get material items, manipulating to get affection and love.
Right.
And that's something that would kind of carry over into my adult life until I got sober, almost 6 years ago. And it can still happen when I'm not on the beam and spiritually fit. But I grew up in Raleigh, and then I went off to school, went to a competitive boarding school when I was a freshman in Virginia, and got not asked back after 2 years. And I loved the school. then I went to another boarding school, all boys up in Connecticut, and it was a great school too. But when I look back on things, that's when I started not being comfortable in my own skin.
Yeah.
And developed a case of the wouldas, the couldas, the shouldas, the spostas. There's an episode of The Simpsons where Milhouse and Bart's teacher, they're supposed to go on a field trip, and one of them says, "But I'm supposed to be over there." And she says, "Sounds like somebody's got a case of the spostas." And that's how I was. I mean, it was all, that's how I felt. I'm supposed to be there. I could have been there. I should be there. And then, I get to college and flunk out of school. And then people are getting ahead of me in life and relationships. If something didn't go my way, I just couldn't deal with anything. I just had no skills. And I was presented with everything. I've heard people say in recovery, I know this isn't specifically a recovery podcast, but I'm in recovery, and that's what helped me that is what turned my life around, is my recovery. I've heard people say I didn't get the map to life.
Okay.
And I don't think I didn't get the map. I just think I had it upside down. My mom would always say to me when I was a kid, when all else fails, read the directions. And I remember putting together models as a kid. I remember I specifically had a Daisy Duke white Jeep model. It's probably 7 years old, 8 years old. And I took the pieces out of the box, put the stickers on the side, put the shell on, but I threw the directions to the side, and I did everything but the engine. There was no inside. And that's kind of how my life was for a long time. It was just, I'll just look like it's okay, but it's not. Go ahead.
Do you think that's a personality type? Do you think it's some sort of, I mean, I hate to say like disorder, but like some sort of mental health issue? Or what do you think makes people think or operate that way?
I mean, I definitely have ADD.
Yeah.
That's part of it. And I was medicated for that for 27 years. And now I kind of, through meditation and a few other things, just kind of deal with it. I think there was some of that. But as far as I don't know. I don't think I have the gene for addiction or alcoholism necessarily, because I just don't, there's nobody directly in my family who has that. It was all self-inflicted.
Yeah.
But to answer your question, I don't know. I don't know if it was just some ADD or it's one thing that I've looked back on and sort of figured out a way to attach that to the way I was living is an analogy, is a symbol to the way I did live. So I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah.
Just the long answer.
Right. So when did you start, dabbling in substances or alcohol?
Sure. So when I was in 8th grade, I think, I drank for the first time and smoked weed for the first time. And it wasn't to be, at that point, it wasn't to escape, I can't stand this life. It wasn't like that at all. It was more, I want to be the cool guy. I want to be the wild, because I was just kind of a wild guy, and definitely grew up with alcohol in the home. Both parents and eventually got remarried. And again, nobody was a big, nobody's an alcoholic, but they, they had parties and they, it was definitely part of the social fabric of how I grew up and all that. But then in 8th grade, I experimented a little bit. I went to high school, experimented more and more.
Mm-hmm.
And I was a big golfer growing up. And then I played golf my freshman year in high school. And then it was one thing that, along with I was an athlete. I played, multiple sports every season. And I got to high school, and right around the time I started drinking and using more and more frequently, I kind of didn't really care. I still had to play sports because it was part of school, but I kind of lost interest in that.
Right.
But anyway, so when I was a freshman, I had a freshman in high school, to be clear. I had my first semester, I didn't do very well.
Mm-hmm.
And this was 1991 going into 1992. And they said, "Hey, you didn't do very well, so you must have ADD." I don't even know if I really got tested, but was prescribed Ritalin.
Right.
And I was prescribed Ritalin and then Adderall until I got sober in 2018. So 27 years of that, where my mood and mind were chemically altered pretty much all the time. Even if it wasn't that, just always had something kind of, some kind of substance in me.
Right. Right. Do you resent or regret being on Ritalin or Adderall? Do you think it messed with you in a negative way?
Probably, but I don't resent it at all. I do remember when being in high school, and because half my friends were prescribed this stuff for the same reasons. And we all thought, are we going to end up on some island together, when they realized, 25 years later that we're all, this was some kind of experiment and we're all going to be completely, need to be quarantined together. So I'm sure it did. It was never really my drug of choice as far as it went, but I definitely abused it and and never really took it exactly as prescribed and all that kind of stuff. But, so the short answer is I did not resent it, but I'm sure it probably didn't help overall. Yeah.
So, you went off to college?
I did.
High school?
I went to the University of Georgia I went from an all boys boarding school to one of the biggest universities in the country, totally unprepared. And, you know, in some ways I was, because I've been at boarding school where I'm used to living away from home and in a dorm and all that. But I almost knew that I was going to go and flunk out. And I did.
Wow.
I just drank and partied and joined a fraternity and slept all day and drank all night. And it was,
You went into it with that mindset.
I did. You know, I kind of did. I didn't do it on purpose, but it was just, I kind of knew that it was going to happen. And sure enough, it did.
Yeah.
And I had a girlfriend at the time. We broke up, and then she started dating other guys, and I just didn't know how to handle it. And the way there's a saying we hear, or I hear in recovery, you know, I take the poison hoping you die. It was kind of like that. Like I will show you by flunking out of school and making my life worse. You know, that was kind of how I operated.
Yeah, like a retaliation.
Right.
But it really harms you.
Exactly.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. So did you finish college?
I did. It took me 7.5 years. I finally finished. But you know, I just took me a long, and when I was first in college, I could never balance the social life and the academic life.
Right.
So when I finally went back to school and finished, I say went back, I was never really completely out of school. I would kind of pretend to go for a while, and then, but I got serious about it. And I wasn't sober at the time, but I did take it really seriously and just got through and graduated, and very grateful to the university that let me in. And I ended up doing really well. When I graduated with, I think, a 3.7 or 3.8.
Yeah. What was your major?
History.
Oh, really? That's interesting. Do you use that today?
You know, I kind of do. Well, because it's sort of laughable, you know, that it's kind of a, you know, somewhat worthless major in English, but I was always interested in it. And it kept me interested to stay in school.
Oh yeah.
You know, and to like school. And the thing is, I think it's an undervalued asset is knowing something about the world.
Well, that's
valid. Yeah. Especially in the age of, you know, social media, when nobody cares about anything other than, you know, the little clip and being cool and the, you know, material things.
Yeah.
You know, it hasn't helped me in business necessarily, but I think it does help me as a human being.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you finished up at Georgia?
No, at UNCW.
Okay. So you transferred there.
Transferred is a loose word.
Oh, okay.
I went to 6 colleges, 2 of them community colleges. I stayed in Athens after Georgia and went to a community college there, and then had 1 good semester, and then went back to my old, I literally got 0.0s, which most people I've only seen in the movie Animal House.
Right.
But believe me, I did it several times. And then I pretended to go to NC State for a while. I pretended, I would enroll, and then, you know, I would miss too many classes, and I would never have the wherewithal to go to the professor or to the counselor and say, hey, listen, I just need to just withdraw. I just wouldn't even do that. And then I would just live in denial until the grades finally showed up at my parents' house. But anyway, so then I got, when I was 22, so I got in a lot of trouble. I got DUIs when I was 20. I was just a mess. And so, I wrecked a car, but didn't get a DUI. And I went on this thing in Montana. It wasn't treatment. I just walked around the Bob Marshall National Forest and Glacier National Park with this Crow Indian guy named Pat. And all we did was talk and trailblaze. And it was so cold. And it was really, again, it wasn't it wasn't treatment, you know, because I did that. I went to treatment later. It wasn't like that. But this guy it was kind of if nothing else, the way I looked at it then was it took me out of life long enough to embarrass me into getting my stuff together briefly.
But how did you get connected to this person?
Through an educational consultant, what we call an ed consultant or a therapeutic consultant. My parents called this woman, same woman who helped me find the schools I went to. And, you know, while I was there, I'm glad this came up because this guy, I don't remember much from it. I just remember mostly not liking it, but it was so cold and it was so hard to get warm every night. And we would, you know, make a fire and get camp set up and cooking. And I'm talking like 20 degrees below zero, walking through creeks and snow and just so cold. And at night, once we would have the fire going, I could kind of take my hat off, take my gloves off. And then if a breeze came, put them back on, I could sort of control my temperature once I got warm.
Right.
And I remember he looked at me and he said, it's a lot easier to stay warm than to get warm. And I knew what he meant right there in that situation.
Yeah.
But I never forgot that.
Yeah.
And then now the way I look at that is with a lot of things, but especially with my recovery and sobriety. It's a lot easier for me to stay sober than to go through all that to get sober all over again.
Right.
But anyway, so that we can get back to that. But so I came back, I went to Cape Fear for a year straight, got into UNCW, had a 4.0, I think, my first semester, did an internship in New York. So I got credit for that. Went abroad for a full year in England. So I got a full year of credits there. I came back and went to one semester at UNCW in a summer class. So all in 2 semesters. And when I graduated, they were like, congratulations. Who are you, by the way?
We've barely seen you
Exactly.
on campus.
Yeah.
I remember the pre-screening stuff that you wrote, that you were a gossip columnist.
I was.
I don't think I've ever met a gossip columnist. That's intriguing. Tell me about that.
So yeah, I lived in England in college, graduated, and they used to have a thing called BUNAC, which I think was absorbed by another organization, but it stood for British Universities North America Club. It was a way for Americans to get a work visa in the Commonwealth, England, Australia, New Zealand, other places, Canada, and really started so Brits could come here without having to have a sponsor by a company for a work visa.
Okay.
So I did that. And my dad had befriended this author who wrote for Vanity Fair and wrote some books that became movies, this interesting guy. His name's Toby Young, actually. He's an interesting, really cool guy. And I kind of hounded him when I got over there. And it wasn't like asking somebody who works for a bank, can I get a job? I mean, when you're a writer, there isn't like you have a lot of positions to fill. But he put me in touch with his former Oxford schoolmate. This guy's name was Sebastian Shakespeare, if you can believe it. And I went to go meet with him, and he just said, hey, if you will find a story. And so for the Evening Standard, Londoner's Diary, I would compare it to the New York Post, page 6. It was a little more social than gossip, but it was definitely a gossip column. Yeah. And so my first story, they printed it and they said, keep coming back. And so I did that during my work visa. And they sent me to, black tie parties, movie premieres and after parties. I interviewed Robert Downey Jr. before, I guess he had just gotten sober back then, for The Singing Detective.
Okay.
John Hurt, all kinds of people. It was fascinating. I didn't make much money doing it, but it was fascinating. And I think being an American, at least this was 21 years ago, when I would ask for the guest list from the gatekeepers, they were surprised that an American was covering this. And so they would kind of give me a little grace.
That's really cool part of your story.
Yeah.
Gossip columnist.
Yeah.
So, okay. So you graduated, and then what happened next in your story?
So I graduated, I moved to Charleston briefly. Then I moved to London, then I moved to New York.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And I worked in the film industry. Started out as a production assistant. I worked on big stuff. I worked on The Sopranos for like a day, but it still says I worked on them.
That's on the resume.
Law and Order, I worked on Munich, the Steven Spielberg movie, big stuff. But then on the small stuff, I would have a bigger role, like a production coordinator or something like that. And so I did that. And, it's I was living in New York. A lot of my friends from various parts of my life were living in New York, and they were mostly working on Wall Street. And I had this job that sounded cool, and when I could tell, I say the royal you, my family, friends, that I'm working on these things, these cool big productions with famous people and all that. And it sounded cool, and it was cool, but it was also not really a permanent job. It's not like I had a 9 to 5 with benefits. I would work on these things for anywhere from 3 days to 3 or 4 months at a time, but then I'd be unemployed for a little while.
Right.
And instead of figuring out what was next, I would just, go to a rap party, wake up hungover and unemployed, and, be in denial about that for a while. Anyway, so I was, it was another way back to that model analogy.
Yeah.
It looked like I was
on the surface.
Yes. It looked good, but underneath it was sort of empty.
Oh yeah, totally. I'm like getting a visual, like the stickers are on the car,
Right.
the model, but like there's nothing on the inside of
Right.
it. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
not sustainable.
Right. Exactly. And then I lived in New York from 2004 to 2009. And then my brother had 2 forms of cancer. He's doing great now, but this was rough. But and the economy had crashed, which were both of those things were true.
Right.
But I used that as an excuse to come back to Raleigh, which was supposed to be temporary, but I knew it would be not temporary.
Yeah.
And then I kind of fumbled around. I worked in advertising and finance. I had my Series 7. I was a stockbroker, believe it or not, for a little while. And then I started doing tech sales. And then in 2017, my dad was diagnosed with cancer. I just turned 40, and I was very sad. My dad and I were very close, probably too close in a lot of ways, very similar in a lot of ways. But the kind of arching sentiment was that I could drink and use and self-medicate with it. I thought it was an airtight excuse to do that.
Right. Because he was sick.
Because he was sick and then dying and died. And what it did was it accelerated what was already there, because the way I drank and used before, I wasn't a daily wake up and drink at lunch or did breakfast. I did that sometimes when but that wasn't how I was. But I tell people a lot who are not sure if they have an issue.
Right.
It doesn't matter how much or how often. It's what it does to us, or sometimes more importantly, especially in my case, what it kept me from doing.
Yeah.
And so I was just never going to grow up and turn my life around.
Right.
Until I got sober. Most people kind of grow up on a even trajectory, a gradual trajectory, or maybe they're kind of growing up and they party a lot and then they get married, or something happens and they kind of grow up. They grow out of it.
And they grow out of it.
I just wasn't. And so that year from 2017 to 2018, it was almost exactly a year where my use just got completely accelerated, which awful reason for it, but it was honestly the best thing that ever happened for me.
Wow.
For sure.
Like, do you like equivocate like your dad passing to you getting your life turned around?
Great question. Yes.
Wow.
Because I would say that's the most valuable thing my dad left me was my sobriety.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty powerful.
Yeah. I wish that he had gotten to see me be sober, but I know he does get to see me be sober.
Yeah. Yeah. So how did you go about that? How did you go about getting sober?
That's another great question.
Yeah.
So I'll just make it very clear. It was not my idea.
Okay.
I had never been to an AA meeting. I knew nothing about recovery. I knew nothing about treatment. I knew nothing about anything other than, basically drinking and doing drugs. I knew that, and I knew a few people who were sober who had gotten sober, and people I grew up with in Raleigh, went to boarding school and or college with, and people who were, kind of partied like I did and they had gotten sober. But I was so jaded by then when I thought about it. My thought was they're so embarrassed that they had to get sober that they're just pretending to be happy.
Oh, yeah.
But that was how I thought about it. So anyway, my brother who was living in Greensboro or Richmond at the time when I got sober, he had come to Raleigh a few times to go over some stuff about my dad's stuff with me. And one time I just, made up a story that I was not emotionally ready to do this, which was not true. I was probably still asleep. Then he came another time. We're supposed to meet on a Sunday, and I went to bed on a Saturday night, which was probably 4 a.m, and woke up on Monday, just full day,
goodness.
Completely gone.
Right.
And then he came back another time. We went to dinner, and I kind of told him what was going on. So, I'd earned my seat as an alcoholic a long time ago, but I got addicted to painkillers. And I told him that's what I was doing. He said, okay, kind of went back with that information. And then it's funny, so much of my job now is getting people to send their insurance information so we can run it and see what their benefits look like. It was either my stepmother or my mother asked me for my insurance card. And I was like, okay, I kind of knew that the sharks were circling.
Right.
And so long story short, they said they had a bed for me at a treatment center. I said, can I think about it? I woke up the next morning. I said, I'm ready to go.
Yeah.
So I went to treatment. I did. And while I was there, I got there, the night I got there, I got on my knees and wept. And on my knees, I said, God, what have you done to me? And then for 3 or 4 days, I said, all right, I'm leaving tomorrow. One day at a time, but I didn't know it. I'm leaving tomorrow. And then I said, all right, I'm not leaving how can I make this go by fast?
Right.
And I thought about being a kid at Christ Church in Raleigh when I was a little kid, and a hymn was being sung. If I didn't pick up the hymnal and sing along, if I just stood there blankly staring ahead, waiting to sit down again to twiddle my thumbs, it would take forever. But if I sang along, it went by fast.
Okay.
And I just applied that to being in treatment. It went by fast. I heard what I needed to hear, which was my way of doing things. Got me half a room at this treatment center. And then, I had what I would only call a spiritual experience around that time in there. And I just felt this voice, felt a voice, didn't hear a voice, felt a voice tell me I was going to be okay. And then, they told me to do, for the first time in my life, I was willing to read directions. And the directions for me are the steps, the book, and for the most part I do,
Yeah. Okay, that's interesting. A thought just came to my mind. For the first time in your life, you were willing to read the directions.
Yes.
Wonder what the difference was at this point versus 8 or 10 or whatever you were back then with the model.
I'll tell you exactly what the difference was, it's called the gift of desperation.
Oh, wow.
So sometimes people have a problem with the God thing and 12-step recovery. And, it's a spiritual program, not a religious program, but I get it. But I hear this said a lot. There's some acronyms that help people. Listen, if you don't worry about the God thing right now, but the GOD can stand for Good Orderly Direction, Group of Drunks. My favorite is Gift of Desperation.
Okay.
I was desperate. I was willing to I didn't want to feel that way anymore. On that first day, I heard somebody say, that person said, I'm sick and tired. I was sick and tired of being sick and tired. I was like, I get it.
Yeah.
I get that. Because I was miserable. I wanted to kill myself. I was never going to because I was too vain and chicken to do it. But I would park my car across the street behind a building so nobody would know I was home and just be holed up, not necessarily even drunk or high, just kind of in terror.
But in your house?
In my house. This is before I got sober. And so I didn't want anybody to come over and see me and pop in. So I moved my car and I'd have blankets over behind the blinds, so be totally dark in there. And one time I forgot to lock the door. My mom just kind of took a shot and came in. 7 p.m. probably on a Tuesday night. I was asleep on the couch, smoking cigarettes, just disgusting. And she came in looking beautiful and jewelry glistening. And she said, what is going on?
Right.
What is going on? And I just said, I'm not dead. You can go now. And that was probably a few weeks before I went to treatment.
Right.
She drove me.
She did.
Yeah.
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 And I always think about the parents, siblings too, and loved ones and family members, but the parents of the adult child usually who is the addict and like what's going on inside of them. That's who I need to have on the podcast is some of these family members who stuck by the addict the whole time.
Yeah. Exactly. Because and that's something I have the pleasure of doing on a daily basis is talking to families, and I can say, hey, I was your son 6 years ago. I was your son and my mom was you, but the good news is we do recover. Yeah. We do. It just takes work, and following directions.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is the gift of desperation. That's what
that was the difference. That was the difference. And and people, everybody has a different bottom, and I don't want to find out if there's another one out there for me,
Right.
And so I just continue to do the work because I hope I never forget how desperate and miserable I was.
Yeah. How do people who go through recovery programs and then they come out, what do they have to do differently so they don't go right back to their old habits or whatever?
So, I'm careful. I try not to talk about AA because it's a tradition thing, but if this is for helping people, then that's what we're doing here.
Right.
So back to that, when all else fails, read the directions. And I'm not saying everybody else has not read the directions. That was my case.
Yeah.
But to continue to follow and read and follow directions. One thing that was so important for me, and I'll never know what would have happened if I hadn't followed this particular suggestion, was go to a meeting the same day. So I got
out.
Yeah. I got home at 10:30 in the morning and a guy took me to a meeting at noon. And then some other friends took me to a meeting that night because it's so alcoholism and addiction, it speaks to us in our own voice and tells us we don't have this disease and tells us we're okay and that we don't need all this Because there were days when I was walking out to go to my car, to go to my home group or whatever, and just thinking, is all this necessary?
Mm.
Then I would go out to the meeting and hear what I needed to hear. And of course it was and is completely necessary.
Right.
But the main thing is to follow those directions, because the people, especially, you know, where we work, and I'm sure you have similar situations where you know, you're recommending further treatment for somebody and they're like, no, I don't, I think I know best.
Yeah. I don't need that.
And nobody is punishing you. Everybody just wants, we know we're professionals. That's what we do, you know, and to follow instructions and take suggestions. That's
yeah.
Whether that's that meeting that day, but I can't emphasize that enough, because what happens is people go to treatment and guess what? They're a whole lot better than they were the day they left or the day they got there, but they're not better.
Right.
They're never going to be all the way better. That's what's so beautiful about it, is there's no graduation from recovery.
Right.
You know, it's a daily thing. And so the mind can trick people into saying, well, you went to treatment for 30 days or 6 months or whatever it was. And then they don't go that first day.
Yeah.
Like, well, I made it. I'm fine. Then another few days. And then maybe they go to one meeting, but then it's awkward because on the back of their mind, they're like, well, I didn't do what I was supposed to do. And this thing, it's awkward. I don't want to go get a bunch of dudes' phone numbers or women's phone numbers. And, you know, it's just, it's a slippery slope, you know? Yeah.
I think what I keep thinking about with whether it's AA or some of these other treatment models or recovery models out there is you just can't do it alone. And I think that's, truthfully, I think that's a high level or low level societal problem, is people, you know, think they can accomplish whatever alone or handle whatever alone. And I don't think it's weakness when you ask for help at all. I think it's courage and bravery and strength when you ask for help or need people to help you along the way to just keep continuing.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the thing. Asking for help is so hard. And then sometimes people do, but then they don't receive the help.
Right. They don't follow the
it.
directions.
Exactly. Exactly. But asking for help is so hard. But then that I talk to people about this all the time, because somebody will say, they call me and they have the gift of desperation when they're on the phone. Yeah. And it's a Tuesday. And then we go through and we're talking about everything. And then the person says, all right, well, I'm going to come in, next Monday. And I say, you know, I hear you. I know you got stuff to do, but when people ask for help, then they wait to receive the help they ask for, it doesn't usually go very well.
Right.
You know?
Right. It's like their energy about it fizzles out.
That too. And there's also the subconscious where they're like, well, hey, I know I'm going to rehab, so I might as well go hard. Even if they're not thinking about that consciously, that thought's in there. And sometimes and then also just, you know, we get these windows. And as far as I know, I have one window of opportunity to get sober, you know, and they close. And sometimes people have multiple year stories about people who've been to treatment 50 times and all that kind of stuff. I picked up enough white chips to tile my bathroom. We hear these stories, but I don't know if I have another, you know, recovery in me. I'm sure I have another relapse in me. We all do, you know, but I don't want to find out. And so my point is, they ask for help and then they don't get it right away. Sometimes things don't go very well.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Let's talk about some advice that you might give to people. Like what advice would say you give to a younger person who maybe adolescent finding themselves in these traps or these habits? You were there once. What would you say to that adolescent?
Yeah. I mean, I would, you know, I'm careful to not ever try to tell people, you know, wag a finger, don't do drugs, don't drink. I mean, because people are going to do what they're going to do. Right. But, you know, my dad would always say to me, everything in moderation. And I know I'm talking to, you know, hypothetically young kids here, I guess, under 18, legal age, all that stuff. The thing is, I took everything too far. Yeah. And the next thing I knew, and my dad actually used to always say another thing to me when I would drink when I was younger in front of him, you know, at a fraternity party or something. And I would basically chug when I drank, and he would say, God damn it. Sorry my language. You drink too fast. You're going to end up being an alcoholic, and you're going to be at your friend's wedding when you're 25 and everybody's going to be drinking. You're going to have to drink coffee, you know? And I used to kind of laugh about it. Right. But he was ultimately right. It took a little bit longer for me to get there. Right. But I would just say, you know, be careful. I guess is the best. And drugs are not cool. They're not. They're not.
Especially these days. I mean, I think my deepest fear is that my kids are going to get tripped up on or encounter some fentanyl and just freaking die.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's not like, I mean, I wasn't a drug user, but, 30, 40 years ago, it just seemed different.
Yeah. Well, and even the weed back then was different. I remember specifically when it changed from being stems and seeds and it made you laugh and tired and hungry to, felt like psychosis inducing weed, which is a real thing now.
Right.
Yeah.
I know, it's so dangerous.
Yeah.
No, drugs are not cool. Don't do drugs.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's but I also understand that the reality is people are going to experiment and do their things, do what they're going to do. But, and go to class when you get to college. That would be a piece of advice for you.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, seriously, like you made it. You made it to college. Like there are people who don't or people who choose not to, but you're there.
Yeah.
Somebody's paying for it, at least at this point.
Yeah.
Somebody's paying for it.
Right.
So make the most of it.
Exactly.
Okay. So then what advice would you give to somebody maybe who's a middle-aged adult and they're struggling?
I need help. Those are powerful words. Ask for it. Ask for help. And there are people, I'm never surprised. It never ceases to amaze me when people say, "Oh my God, there's so many people who are sober." I felt the same way, because we think that we're suddenly going to be ostracized and
for drinking coffee at the wedding.
Oh, right. Yeah. Or, oh my God, this is so embarrassing. What's embarrassing is the way I was living before I got sober, especially that last year. Yeah. It's hard. People say, "Oh God, this must be so hard to be sober." And you know what? What's hard is living the way I was living before I got sober. That's awful. Yeah. Because it's not just the physical part, but all the web of deceit and just constantly maneuvering, manipulating to make sure that I wasn't getting fired or my girlfriend wasn't mad at me or, I had enough money in my account to pay one bill, robbing Peter to pay Paul. That's hard.
Yeah.
Living like this is easy compared to that.
Right. I mean, I'm just thinking about how stressful that is.
It's so stressful.
Which then causes people to use more, drink more, whatever.
Exactly. Yeah. That was my solution to everything was substances.
Yeah.
My problem wasn't the drinking and the drugging. It was life. I couldn't handle life on life's terms.
Yeah.
That's something we hear about a lot in recovery. Life on life's terms.
Right.
But to your question though, ask for help. Yeah. And I think I talked about this on another podcast that I was the host. But a lot of people talk about this is a struggle and a fight, but it's not. It's give up. That's the thing. Surrendering to win. It's not that it's overlooked or not talked about, but somehow people still are always talking about fighting. That's the whole problem. Is when we keep fighting, we see in my form of recovery, we cease fighting everything and everyone, even alcohol, or drugs. But that's the thing. We give up. That's why we have white chips.
Yeah.
International sign of surrender.
Okay, got it. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Just finally give up, relinquish the control of trying to.
Exactly. There's a story in the big book about a woman who works for a law firm, and she goes to a work party, and she knows she's an alcoholic. She's struggled. She's a lawyer. She goes to her firm's party at some, cocktail party, and she drinks one or two drinks. She gets home. She did it. She made it through the party. She was miserable. She was miserable because she's an alcoholic. She wanted to just drink. Yeah. Then so the next function is a hockey game, and she drinks the way she wants to drink, and she gets completely blacked out, makes a fool of herself, and gets fired. And her conclusion was, when I controlled it, I couldn't enjoy it. And when I enjoyed it, I couldn't control it. And that's kind of where I got, and most of us do, and it's just, when we try to control it, it's no fun. And when we try to control life, it's no fun, but when we give up and surrender to the fact that we, in my case, alcoholic addict, then go from there.
Yeah, that's powerful.
Yeah.
Wow. So, talk for a minute about New Waters. What are you all doing over there? I highly respect the programming and what you all are doing.
Thank you. We feel the same way about you. So we are a holistic medical detox for adults, and we also do diagnostic assessments for adults. All of that is inpatient. So detox, most people are there just for detox from substances. We're holistic and medical meaning we have a team of, we're staffed 24 hours a day. Medical, we have a team of nurses, nurse practitioner, medical directors, a psychiatrist, a rounding doctor who's an internal medicine doctor. Clinical, have going to see a clinician every day, groups every day. We also do a wide variety of holistic services to help in the detox process, whether that is acupuncture, yoga, infrared sauna therapy, acupuncture, yoga, breath work, infrared sauna therapy, IV therapy, massage therapy. We have chef prepared meals. The rooms are all nice. It's an amazing place, but it's easy for me to feature pitch about how nice it is. But it's really the care people get when they're with us is just, there's nothing like it. I've been to detox. I used to work for a detox, been to hundreds of them for my job, and I've just never seen anything like it. And then we do diagnostic assessments for people who may or may not have substance use to speak of. Most do, but it's kind of they've never been diagnosed or overdiagnosed or maybe misdiagnosed.
Right.
So they come in, we have 3 tiers, anywhere from 1 week to 10 days to 2 full weeks, depending on which tier they choose to do. And the idea is through kind of 4 main categories, psychological, psychiatric, medical, and then social family systems, just figure out what's making them tick. And the higher the tier, the more granular it is. And they want to get a diagnosis to figure out what's really going on, because in a lot of cases, people have been, seeking and going to treatment often multiple times, going to doctors and providers, and they get all these different answers, but they don't ever really get the right one.
Right.
And so in this controlled space where we can also observe them, eat and socialize and interact, on top of all the testing, kind of figure out really what to treat. And then that informs the treatment recommendations for after they leave us.
Yeah, that's great. What's the website?
newwatersrecovery.com.
Yeah. Excellent. In Raleigh.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, very informative. Thank you so much for sharing your story, for being vulnerable.
Thank you for having me.
Anything else you want to leave the listeners with before we sign off?
I just always want to reiterate those 3 powerful words: I need help.
Yeah. Nothing
Nothing wrong with getting help. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. If you need help and you're listening, feel free to reach out to New Waters. One of the things I respect about New Waters, if you all can't serve or treat or do the thing, you will help this person find who they need.
Absolutely.
And I think that's really awesome.
We want to help. We want to serve everybody, but not everybody's gonna be a good fit. But we definitely help everybody, whether that's giving them resources or whatever that looks like. And my direct number, my cell phone is 919-649-7698. If you just want to talk to an alcoholic, I'm right here.
That's awesome. Thanks. Hope you don't get any spam calls. If you like what you're hearing, hey, follow us, subscribe, YouTube, Apple Podcast, or Spotify. Give us a 5-star review if you especially liked it. Thanks so much, B, for being on the podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me.
We hope that this will encourage you and help you maybe make a fresh start, turn your life around, ask for help. So thanks again for listening.